Everyone in the grand ballroom froze when the new cleaning lady stumbled and dropped a tray full of sparkling water glasses onto the marble floor, right at the feet of Anthony Johnson, the handsome heir to the Johnson fortune. Anthony, standing tall in his sharp black suit, stepped back quickly as the glasses shattered around him. Gasps filled the room. Women in glittering dresses and men with shining cufflinks turned to stare. A few guests shook their heads and whispered to each other. Who hired that clumsy cleaner? She just embarrassed herself in front of Anthony Johnson. Hidden behind a worn baseball cap and oversized glasses, the cleaning lady dropped to her knees, gathering the broken glass with shaky hands. Nobody knew, not even Anthony, that this wasn't just any cleaner. It was Karen Johnson, his mother, one of the richest women in America. She had come here undercover on a secret mission, to find the perfect wife for her only son without him or anyone else knowing. Karen kept her head down, pretending to be embarrassed, but her sharp eyes scanned the room. She wanted to see who would treat a simple worker with kindness, and who would turn away. Most people just watched. Some frowned. Others took a few steps back, not wanting to dirty their expensive shoes. Karen felt a sting of disappointment until she heard soft footsteps rushing toward her. A young woman in a simple lavender dress dropped to her knees beside her. She wore a plain name tag that read, Stacy Monroe. It was clear she worked for the catering company, not as one of the wealthy guests. Are you okay, Stacy asked gently, helping to pick up the pieces without hesitation. Karen blinked in surprise. She didn't expect anyone to help. Stacy smiled warmly as she wiped the floor with napkins. You must have slipped. Don't worry, it's just a little water, she said softly, trying to make Karen feel better. Karen's heart softened. Here, in a sea of polished smiles and cold glances, was someone real. As Karen and Stacy worked together to clean up the mess, Karen noticed two more people standing nearby. Sunshine King, a young woman dressed in a bright gold gown and dripping in diamonds, laughed quietly with her boyfriend Walter Blake, a tall man with slicked back hair and an oversized gold watch. They whispered to each other, looking at Stacy with disgust. She's trying way too hard, Sunshine said with a fake pout. Karen kept her face blank, but inside, she was taking notes. The people who mattered most weren't always the ones who shined the brightest. When Stacy finished helping her, she gave Karen a small smile and stood up quickly to avoid being scolded by the catering supervisor. Karen stayed on the floor a little longer, pretending to wipe invisible stains, just to watch the people's reactions. Most turned back to their champagne and laughter, forgetting the whole thing within seconds. But Karen had seen what she needed to see. As she slowly stood up and pushed the cart away, she smiled under her cap. Maybe tonight she had found someone special for her son. But deep inside, she knew it wouldn't be that easy. Someone had already noticed the way she looked at Stacy. Someone who wasn't going to let a simple catering girl get close to the golden boy, Anthony Johnson. The games were just beginning. And Karen, no matter how much she wanted to stay hidden, would soon have to step out of the shadows to protect what she had found. Karen stood near the far wall of the ballroom, pretending to wipe a glass table as she watched the guests mingle again like nothing had happened. Her eyes, however, stayed on Stacy Monroe, who was now busy carrying a tray of appetizers through the crowd. The young woman moved carefully, her steps light and fast. She smiled politely at the guests, but it wasn't hard to see she didn't truly belong here. Her simple dress, her nervous glances, the way she clutched the tray like a shield, it made her stand out among the polished crowd dripping in diamonds and silk. Karen's heart tugged. This girl wasn't chasing wealth. She wasn't here to show off. She was here to work. It reminded Karen of herself many years ago, when she was nothing more than a waitress in a small-town diner, dreaming of a better life. It was that same spirit, hard work, humility, and kindness that had helped Karen build her empire from nothing. And it was that same spirit she wanted for her son. Anthony deserved someone real. Someone who would love him, not his money. Karen wiped the table slowly, deep in thought, until a familiar giggle floated across the room. She turned just in time to see Sunshine King and Walter Blake leaning close to Anthony, laughing as if they were old friends. Sunshine placed a perfectly manicured hand on Anthony's arm and said something that made him chuckle politely. Karen narrowed her eyes. Sunshine wasn't just being friendly. She was clinging. Karen could see it clearly, though Anthony, ever polite, probably thought nothing of it. Sunshine's eyes weren't on Anthony's smile. They were on his gold watch, the one passed down from his grandfather. They were on the family crest stitched into his blazer. They were on the future she wanted, the wealth, the power, the status. Karen felt a familiar anger stir inside her. She had watched too many people pretend to love her son over the years. Sweet words. Empty promises. But not Stacy. Stacy hadn't even looked twice at Anthony when she helped pick up the broken glasses. She didn't know she had been kneeling in front of one of the richest heirs in the country. She only cared that someone needed help. Karen smiled under her breath. But as much as she wanted to believe in Stacy, she knew she couldn't let her guard down yet. There was still a lot she needed to learn. She pushed her cleaning cart toward the kitchen entrance, careful to blend into the shadows. She found a small storage closet, slipped inside, and pulled out her hidden phone. She dialed a private number. "George," she whispered when her assistant picked up. "I need a background check. Name, Stacy Monroe. Catering company. Find everything. Family, work history, school records. And be discreet." George, as always, didn't ask questions. "I'll get on it right away," he said. Karen hung up and tucked the phone away. She leaned back against the wall, heart pounding. She hated snooping. She hated not trusting her instincts. But when it came to Anthony's future, she couldn't afford mistakes. Especially not with people like Sunshine lurking nearby, ready to pounce at the first opportunity. After a few minutes, she composed herself and returned to the main ballroom. The music had shifted to a slow, romantic tune, and couples had started to pair off on the dance floor. Karen's eyes immediately found Anthony, who stood near the bar chatting with a few old college friends. Stacy, meanwhile, was weaving through the tables with a tray of sparkling lemonade. Karen watched in horror as Sunshine accidentally stuck out her foot just as Stacy passed by. The tray tilted dangerously. Time seemed to slow. Stacy stumbled but somehow caught herself, only spilling a few drops onto the floor. The guests nearby snickered. Sunshine covered her mouth with a fake gasp and said loudly, "Oh dear, watch where you're going. You almost ruined Anthony's suit." Karen clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. She saw everything. She saw the way Sunshine smiled sweetly at Anthony, pretending to be concerned, while glaring daggers at Stacy behind his back. Anthony, to his credit, looked confused. He frowned slightly and helped steady Stacy's tray. "You okay?" he asked kindly. Stacy nodded quickly, cheeks burning. "I'm fine, sir. Thank you." Karen's heart twisted again. Stacy didn't whine. She didn't blame anyone. She just smiled politely and hurried away, head bowed. Meanwhile, Sunshine fluttered her lashes and whispered something to Anthony that made him laugh awkwardly before excusing himself. Karen had seen enough for tonight. She made her way toward the kitchen, keeping close to the shadows. As she passed by the hallway leading to the garden, she caught sight of Walter Blake huddled with two other young men she didn't recognize, both flashing Rolex watches and wearing smug grins. She slowed down, pretending to wipe a nearby window. "You think the old lady's picking someone for Anthony?" one man whispered. Walter laughed. "Maybe. She's been acting weird all night." The second man snickered. "Bet she's looking for someone good enough to dig into that fortune." Walter shrugged. "Not that it matters. Sunshine's got this in the bag. She's been cozying up to Anthony for months." Karen's stomach turned. Sunshine wasn't just some random gold digger. She was playing a long game. Karen tightened her grip on the rag in her hand. She couldn't let that happen. Not to her son. She needed a plan. And she needed it fast. By the time Karen finished wiping the last window, the party was beginning to wind down. Guests were saying their goodbyes, gathering their coats, kissing cheeks. Karen kept a careful eye on Stacy, who was stacking plates and wiping tables, trying to finish her shift as fast as possible. Sunshine, meanwhile, clung to Anthony's side, whispering into his ear, laughing a little too loudly at his every word. Karen wanted to scream. But she stayed silent. The time wasn't right yet. As the final guests disappeared into the night, Karen slipped back into the storage closet and pulled out her phone again. George had sent her a file. She opened it quickly, scanning the details. Stacy Monroe. Age, 23. Parents, deceased. Raised by her grandmother until she passed away 2 years ago. Currently working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No debts. Clean. Completely clean. Karen's heart swelled with pride. This girl had fought her whole life to survive. She wasn't asking for handouts. She wasn't chasing luxury. She was building something with her own 2 hands. Exactly the kind of spirit Karen admired most. But even as she smiled, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, about Sunshine King. Karen's face hardened as she read it. Credit card debt in the hundreds of thousands. Lawsuits for unpaid loans. Fake social media followers. Rumors of secret deals with tabloids for stories about high society romances, including Anthony. Karen's fingers trembled with rage. Sunshine wasn't just after Anthony's money. She was willing to destroy his reputation if it meant getting a bigger payday. Karen slipped the phone back into her pocket and straightened up. She wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't reveal herself yet. Not until she was sure Stacy cared for Anthony, not his fortune. But Sunshine had just declared war. And Karen Johnson was a woman who didn't lose battles. As the catering staff cleaned the last tables, Karen saw Stacy step outside into the cool night air, wrapping her arms around herself against the breeze. Karen followed quietly, standing just inside the doorway. She watched as Anthony, looking tired but kind, noticed Stacy shivering and pulled off his suit jacket. Without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. Stacy looked up in surprise, her eyes wide. Anthony smiled. You helped my mom's company tonight. Least I can do is help you stay warm. He thought she was just another worker from the cleaning agency. He had no idea who Karen really was. Stacy blushed and whispered, Thank you, sir. You're very kind. Anthony chuckled. It's just a jacket. But you're welcome. Karen watched them for a long time. Something beautiful was happening, slow, natural, real. But it wasn't safe yet. Not with Sunshine still lurking. Karen knew she would have to be careful. She would have to move her pieces carefully, like a chess master protecting her king. And just as she thought that, she heard the sharp click of high heels behind her. Sunshine's voice, dripping with sweetness, floated through the air. There you are, Anthony, she purred. I was looking everywhere for you. Karen stepped back into the shadows. The battle had just begun. But so had hope. The night air carried a chill as Anthony walked toward Sunshine, who stood by the marble fountain, pretending to shiver in the cold. She smiled brightly when she saw him, but there was a tightness around her eyes that Karen noticed immediately. Sunshine leaned in close to Anthony, wrapping her arms around herself dramatically. You're such a gentleman, she said in a soft voice. Helping the help and all. So sweet. Anthony gave a polite smile but said nothing. Karen could tell he was getting tired of the night, tired of fake conversations and polite laughter. He was too kind to be rude, but he wasn't blind either. Sunshine kept talking, her words sticky and sweet like too much candy. You know, she said, flipping her long blonde hair over her shoulder, not everyone deserves your kindness. Some people just pretend to be good so they can get close to people like you. Karen's stomach twisted. She knew exactly who Sunshine was talking about. She was setting a trap. Planting seeds of doubt about Stacy. Anthony shifted uncomfortably. I don't really think that way, he said. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Sunshine pouted. You're just too trusting, Anthony. That's what makes you so special. She brushed a hand against his sleeve, but Anthony stepped back casually, pretending not to notice. Karen's lips curled into a small smile. Her son had more sense than Sunshine gave him credit for. Still, Karen knew words could be dangerous. Once doubt crept in, it was hard to get rid of it. She would have to be careful. Anthony gave Sunshine a small nod and said, I should check on my mother's staff before I head out. "Good night, sunshine." Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared inside the house. Sunshine stood alone for a moment, her smile faltering. Then, with a dark look, she pulled out her phone and began furiously typing. Karen, still hidden, moved back into the shadows, her mind racing. Sunshine wasn't giving up. She was planning something. And whatever it was, Karen needed to be ready. Inside, the ballroom was almost empty now. The catering staff, including Stacy, were stacking chairs and wiping down tables. Karen slipped among them, pretending to check the floors. She watched Stacy laugh quietly with an older woman from the kitchen, her tired face lighting up as she joked about the heavy silverware. There was something pure about her laugh, no hint of greed or pretense. Karen felt a deep warmth in her chest. This girl wasn't playing games. She was living her life the only way she knew how, with honesty and kindness. Karen turned away before anyone noticed her staring. She needed time to think. Outside, the parking lot was filling up with black town cars and gleaming SUVs, whisking guests away into the night. Karen slipped out a side door and made her way to the small staff parking lot, where battered old cars and rusty bicycles waited under flickering streetlights. She spotted Stacy sitting on the hood of a faded blue Honda, staring up at the stars. Karen hesitated for a moment, then walked over slowly, still wearing her cleaner's uniform. "Long night?" Karen asked softly. Stacy smiled without looking down. "The longest," she said. "But it was beautiful, wasn't it? The lights, the music, it felt like another world for a while." Karen nodded. "It's a hard world to live in every day," she said carefully. Stacy finally looked at her. "I don't think I belong in places like that," she said quietly. "People like me, we're just passing through. We serve the food, clean the mess, then disappear." Karen's throat tightened. She had once felt the same way, standing outside grand parties, wearing borrowed shoes, dreaming of a life that felt impossible. "You belong wherever you want to be," Karen said. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Stacy laughed softly. "You sound like my grandmother. She used to say that too." Karen smiled, feeling a strange wave of affection for this girl she barely knew. "Smart woman," Karen said. The two sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets sing. Finally, Stacy stood up and stretched. "Thanks for talking to me," she said. "Most people don't even see me." Karen watched her walk away, disappearing into the night like a ghost. But Karen saw her. She saw her clearly. And she wasn't going to let the world crush her spirit. Not if she could help it. The next morning, the Johnson mansion buzzed with quiet tension. Karen sat at the kitchen island, sipping coffee as George briefed her on the latest news. Sunshine King posted something strange on social media early this morning, George said, scrolling through his tablet. He turned the screen to show Karen a photo. It was a blurry picture taken from across the ballroom, a snapshot of Stacy helping to clean up the spilled water near Anthony's shoes. But the caption underneath was nasty. "Some people will do anything to catch a rich man's eye. Even spill a drink at his feet. #gold digger alert #watch out Anthony." Karen's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She had expected Sunshine to scheme. But this was dirty. And dangerous. The post was already gaining attention. Comments flooded in, filled with cruel jokes and ugly assumptions. Karen set her cup down slowly. "Take it down," she said calmly. George blinked. "Find a way," Karen said. "Buy the account. Threaten legal action. I don't care. That post disappears." George nodded and left the room quickly. Karen sat back, staring out the wide glass windows into the bright morning sun. Sunshine had made her move. Now it was Karen's turn. Later that afternoon, Karen arranged a small lunch at one of her private estates outside the city. She invited Anthony, of course, but also a few carefully selected young professionals, artists, doctors, teachers, people who had nothing to do with the shallow, money-hungry world of the wealthy elite. And among them, through a casual invitation slipped to her catering company, was Stacy Monroe. Anthony arrived looking relaxed, happy to escape the pressure of his usual social circle. Karen greeted him with a hug, then watched carefully as he made his way through the crowd. It didn't take long. Within minutes, Anthony found himself standing beside Stacy by the dessert table. Karen watched from a distance as they talked. At first, Stacy seemed shy, tugging nervously at the edge of her simple blouse. But Anthony said something funny, and she laughed, a real, beautiful laugh that made her eyes shine. Karen smiled. They looked good together. Natural. Unforced. Meanwhile, Sunshine's name was barely whispered today. Karen had made sure of it. And she wasn't finished yet. As Anthony and Stacy talked, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of orange and gold, Karen felt a deep peace settle in her heart. She had made the right choice. But as she turned away, her phone buzzed again. A message from George. One short sentence. Sunshine is planning something bigger. Watch your back. Karen's smile faded. The war wasn't over yet. And the next battle would be even more dangerous. She slipped the phone into her pocket and squared her shoulders. If Sunshine thought she could win against a mother fighting for her son's future, she had another thing coming. Karen Johnson had built empires from nothing. She wasn't about to lose the most important battle of her life. Not now. Not ever. Karen Johnson sat at her desk that evening, the golden light of the setting sun painting the walls of her study. Her hands moved slowly over a folder George had brought just moments earlier. It contained everything she needed to know about Sunshine King. Karen's fingers brushed over the glossy photos tucked inside. Sunshine, smiling brightly at charity events, posing on red carpets, sipping champagne next to powerful men twice her age. All smiles on the outside, but Karen had read between the lines. There was desperation there, the sharp, hidden hunger of someone who would burn down a house if it meant she could steal the jewelry inside. A soft knock at the door pulled Karen from her thoughts. It was Anthony. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "Do you have a minute?" Karen smiled and gestured to the chair across from her. "Of course," she said warmly. "Always for you." Anthony sat down, running a hand through his dark hair. I feel like something weird is happening," he said slowly. "I heard from a few friends today. Apparently, there's some gossip going around. About me. About some girl trying to trap me." Karen stayed still. "Sunshine started it," Anthony added, his mouth twisting slightly. "Posting things. Making jokes at parties." He looked up, his eyes filled with frustration and sadness. "Why do people always think the worst of others?" he asked. Karen leaned forward, resting her hands gently on the desk. "Because, darling," she said softly, "sometimes people see kindness as weakness. They think if you're good, you must be naive." Anthony sighed heavily. "I just hate that Stacy's getting dragged into this," he said. Karen's heart lifted slightly. So he already knew. Already cared. "You know Stacy's not like that," Karen said carefully. Anthony nodded firmly. "I know. I just wish everyone else did too." Karen smiled warmly. "They will," she promised. "Give it time." After Anthony left the study, Karen turned back to her folder. She stared at the photo of Sunshine for a long time. The girl had made her move. Now it was time for Karen to make hers. The next evening, Karen hosted a small event at a different property, a beautiful vineyard estate just outside Los Angeles. It was supposed to be a relaxed, casual dinner with close family friends. Sunshine arrived anyway. She wasn't invited, but she came clinging to Walter's arm, smiling like she belonged. Karen greeted her with the politeness expected of a hostess but gave nothing more. She had already set everything in motion. Throughout the evening, Karen watched Sunshine from across the garden. The girl was restless, snapping at waiters, rolling her eyes at the other guests, trying to steer Anthony's attention away from Stacy whenever possible. It was exhausting to watch. Stacy, meanwhile, moved quietly through the garden, talking with the older guests, laughing with the children, helping a woman pick up her fallen purse without thinking twice about it. Karen's heart warmed every time she caught a glimpse of her. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the fairy lights twinkled above, the guests gathered around the outdoor fireplace for dessert. Karen rose from her seat. "I have a little surprise for everyone," she said, smiling. The guests murmured excitedly. Karen turned toward the side path where George stood waiting with a laptop. In front of everyone, on a large screen set up near the vineyard rows, Karen began playing a short video. It showed clips from recent charity events, moments where Stacy had volunteered at food banks, helped organize school fundraisers, and cared for elderly neighbors during the pandemic. Photos of Stacy, dressed plainly, always smiling, never asking for attention, filled the screen. Karen turned back to the guests. "I thought tonight, we should honor not just wealth or success, but character," she said. "True kindness. True humility. Qualities that money can't buy." The guests applauded warmly. Sunshine's face twisted into a tight, bitter smile. Karen wasn't finished. "Some people," Karen said casually, her voice cutting through the warm night air, "pretend to be something they're not. They chase attention, they chase wealth, they chase people like my son, not for love, but for gain." There were murmurs around the fire pit. Karen's voice stayed calm and gentle, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. "And some people," she continued, smiling directly at Stacy, "simply show up every day and choose to be good. No cameras. No headlines. No games." The applause grew louder. Anthony's face lit up with pride. Karen caught Sunshine staring at her, hatred burning in her eyes. Good, Karen thought. Let her know she's already lost. After the event, as the guests trickled away, Sunshine cornered Karen near the grapevines. "You think you're so clever," Sunshine hissed, her perfect smile gone. Karen tilted her head slightly. "I don't think, dear," she said softly. "I know." Sunshine's hands clenched at her sides. "You'll regret humiliating me," she spat. Karen's smile never wavered. "If you come after my son again," she said sweetly, "I will make sure you regret it first." For a moment, they stared at each other, the quiet vineyard holding its breath. Then Sunshine turned and stormed away, her heels crunching angrily on the gravel. Karen exhaled slowly, feeling lighter than she had in months. The worst of the storm had passed. Or so she thought. Because the next morning, as she sat sipping coffee in her sunroom, George burst into the house, his face pale. He said urgently, holding out his phone. "You need to see this." Karen took the phone, her heart already sinking. On the screen was a new headline. Anthony Johnson caught in gold digger scandal, sources claim secret engagement. Karen stared at the article, her mind racing. Fake photoshopped pictures. False quotes. Sunshine had gone to the tabloids. And worse, she had somehow made it look like Anthony and Stacy were secretly engaged. Karen's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a petty game anymore. It was war. And this time, it wasn't just her family's reputation on the line. It was Stacy's life. Her future. Karen stood up slowly, her eyes blazing with determination. "Call Anthony," she said to George. "Call Stacy." She grabbed her coat. "And tell them to meet me at the penthouse. Now." This wasn't going to end with whispers in the dark. Karen was going to finish it. Publicly. Permanently. And when she was done, the world would know the truth. And Sunshine King would wish she had never played with a mother's love. The city skyline shimmered as Karen's black car sped through downtown Los Angeles. She sat in the back seat, silent, staring out the window as her mind raced. By the time she arrived at the penthouse, Anthony and Stacy were already there, waiting in the sleek white living room, their faces drawn with worry. Anthony stood first. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked urgently. Karen walked straight to them, placing a calming hand on his arm. "There's been an attack," she said quietly. "Sunshine went to the tabloids. She's trying to destroy your name. And Stacy's." Stacy's eyes widened, her face turning pale. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would someone do that?" Karen turned to her fully, her voice gentle. "Because you're good, Stacy. Because you're real. And some people can't stand that." Stacy shook her head, her hands trembling. "I can't be part of a scandal," she said. "I'm just trying to finish school, take care of my brother. I don't want attention or trouble. I never asked for any of this." Karen's heart ached. She walked closer and took Stacy's hands in hers. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. And you won't face this alone. Anthony moved beside them, his voice steady and sure. I'm not letting anyone hurt you, Stacy. Stacy looked between them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But how do you fight lies like this? She asked softly. Karen gave a small, fierce smile. You fight it with truth, she said. And we're going to do it together. She turned to George, who stood nearby with a tablet in his hands. I want a press conference, Karen said. Today. No delays. George nodded immediately. I've already arranged it. Journalists are gathering downstairs. Anthony looked shocked. A press conference. Mom, are you sure? Karen smiled. If Sunshine wants a public fight, she said calmly, we'll give her one. She squeezed Stacy's hand gently. And we'll win. Within an hour, the rooftop garden of the penthouse was transformed into a media stage. Cameras lined up in neat rows. Microphones poked forward like curious noses. Karen stood behind Anthony and Stacy as the press buzzed with whispers and flashing lights. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her family's legacy, of her son's future, resting on her shoulders. But she didn't feel fear. She felt power. She stepped forward to the podium, her eyes scanning the crowd until every reporter fell silent. Good afternoon, she said, her voice carrying strong and clear across the rooftop. My name is Karen Johnson. You all know me as a businesswoman, a philanthropist. But today, I'm here first and foremost as a mother. The cameras clicked rapidly. I stand here because false stories have been spread, stories meant to harm not just my family, but a good, innocent young woman who has done nothing to deserve it. She gestured to Stacy, who stood quietly beside Anthony. Stacy Monroe is not a gold digger, Karen said, her voice ringing with truth. She is not seeking fame or fortune. She is a hard-working young woman, studying to become a nurse, supporting herself and her brother after tragedy took her family. There were murmurs from the crowd. Karen continued, never faltering. My son, Anthony Johnson, has built his life on kindness, respect, and integrity. And I refuse to allow lies to tarnish what he has worked for, or to hurt the woman who has shown more character than any so-called high society figure ever could.